Trump came out swinging a bit. He pointed out that she was polling at 1% in a recent poll. He highlighted her past commitment to not running against him if he decided to run in 2024.
Yeah.
And she justified that later by saying that the conditions changed, that there was a withdrawal from Afghanistan, there was rampant inflation, there have been all these problems basically, and she just felt she had to get into the race.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Mantle. I'm joined today by breaking politics reporter Ryan King. Ryan, former President Donald Trump has some company in the Republican presidential primary field. Who does he have? What's happened? Where are we at?
That's right. It's no longer a one-man race. Former UN ambassador and former South Carolina governor Nikki Haley jumped in this week. Kind of a little bit of a surprise announcement. She released a video on February 14th. She had an event planned on February 15th in Charleston, South Carolina.
Scooped her own announcement a little bit.
Right, exactly. I mean, it kind of helped ensure that she had media coverage, good media coverage for 2 days to kind of kickstart her campaign.
Sure.
And so she was calling for a new generation of leadership, kind of taking a little bit of a shot at President Joe Biden's age and kind of a little bit at former President Donald Trump's age as well. At one point, she called for politicians over the age of 75 to receive cognitive tests.
Right. And well, that
definitely
was
a shot at Biden there.
That's obviously a shot at Biden, but former President Trump is 76.
Right. That's right. Yep. So Haley, during her announcement speech, she largely avoided talking about Trump directly, trying to avoid getting into like a back and forth with him. He's a bit of a rhetorical brawler, likes to use nicknames against his rivals and kind of get in the mud a little bit. So she was trying to avoid that. And Trump came out swinging a bit. He pointed out that she was polling at 1% in a recent poll. He highlighted her past commitment to not running against him if he decided to run in 2024. And she justified that later by saying that the conditions changed, that there was a withdrawal from Afghanistan, there was rampant inflation, there have been all these problems basically, and she just felt she had to get into the race basically. And she had said that she had a call with Trump prior to her announcement, didn't really talk about the details of it. But yeah,
she said she told him she was going to run, she didn't ask.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yeah. Because initially she suggested she would have a conversation about whether or not to run with him. And now she was saying she told him directly that he would run. And it's interesting because former Vice President Mike Pence kind of weighed in on Haley's run. He had a different approach to this than Trump did. He basically said she was such a great asset to the Trump administration. She was a fantastic governor of South Carolina. He couldn't say enough about her. Trump was a little bit more harsh. He was saying that he pulled her to be the United Nations ambassador to spare the people of South Carolina. He did that as a favor to them, basically. So he's kind of shaming her a little bit. The polling aggregates kind of suggest that she's running in about fourth place usually behind Trump, DeSantis, Pence. Although there have been some recent polls where she's moved up to third place, kind of buoyed by her announcement, all the speculation around that. So it'll be an interesting race to watch.
Yeah, and South Carolina is an early state, even though it's not quite as early for Republicans as it's going to be for the Democrats. But it's an interesting dynamic in that Mike Pence obviously worked for Trump as vice president. Haley obviously worked for Trump. The only reference by name in her announcement speech was President Trump nominated her to be UN ambassador. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo worked for Trump. So you're going to have all of these people who work for Trump say that they're better, and you're going to have Trump say, I hired all these people, but they're terrible.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun dynamic to watch. And so Haley kind of followed her announcement by she's heading to New Hampshire and then Iowa for a series of town hall style events. So she's kind of kicking her campaign up into high gear.
Sure. So that's not the only interesting and maybe problematic and infighting dynamic we see on the Republican side. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, the top Republican in the Senate, and Senator Rick Scott, President Biden's favorite Republican senator to name check, they have not been getting along. Talk a little bit about what's going on between the two of them.
Right, they have a lot of beef, and it's interesting because they have different styles. Like
Right.
Mitch McConnell's almost like a little bit of a political stealth ninja. Like you don't really read him that well. He does it. He keeps his cards close to his chest.
Cocaine Mitch, as they say.
Right, people make a lot of jokes about him. Scott is a little bit more forward with things. Like he'll go on TV, like he'll do more news appearances, kind of make more of a splash. So
He's more of a boxer while McConnell is a ninja.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have different styles,
Okay.
but they also have different approaches to political strategy.
Right.
And so during the midterm cycle, McConnell was kind of largely avoiding putting out a comprehensive Republican agenda.
Right.
And that was something that bothered Rick Scott. So he put out this 12-point plan.
And Scott was, in that election cycle, the chairman of the Senate Republicans' campaign arm.
Yes, exactly. So he was kind of overseeing like the official funding apparatus for Senate Republican candidates. And he got a little bit of blame for that because funds kind of started to dry up a little bit
Right.
because he started, under him, the NRSC had basically kind of doled out a lot of money early to build up like digital infrastructure and different things. And then Republicans ultimately lost a seat in Pennsylvania during the midterm cycle. So there was some concerns about his leadership, but he voiced concerns about McConnell's leadership,
Right.
kind of suggesting that Republicans hadn't been fighting the Biden administration enough, and of course he had concerns about the lack of like a clear agenda, and so his 12-point plan had a provision in it where it was basically talk about having a review of government funded programs, like basically almost like every 5 years.
Right.
And so Democrats kind of seized on that and were basically suggesting that Republicans were eager to make cuts to Social Security or Medicare.
Sunset the programs entirely was their allegation.
Exactly. Exactly. And so House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has denied that. Mitch McConnell has denied that. Rick Scott has denied that a bit as well. But it's kind of fed fodder for the Democrats. And so McConnell's been unhappy with that, and he point blank called it a bad idea. So they've kind of been feuding for a bit. And then last November, Scott challenged Mitch McConnell to be the top Republican leader in the
Right.
Senate, the minority leader, and he lost. He lost kind of considerably. Trump backed him in that race.
Right.
Trump has beef with McConnell as well. He was
Sure.
upset because McConnell has criticized him about January 6th, and McConnell hasn't really towed the MAGA line, so to speak.
Right.
Scott has been buoyed by that because Trump had backed him, and then recently Scott, who's going to be up for re-election in 2024 for Florida, the Florida Senate seat, he got the recent backing of the Chamber of Commerce, which is a group that Trump doesn't like very much. So Trump kind of took a little bit of a shot at Scott recently.
The business wing of the Republican Party.
Exactly. And so Trump has been rankled by them, and he took that opportunity to also kind of snipe at Scott for questions about funding for Social Security and Medicare.
Right. Trump has, dating back to the 2016 campaign, been against, or said he's been against, Social Security and Medicare cuts. Now, there's some Democrats who point to certain things that happened during the Trump administration, say that maybe it's more complicated than that, but that's how he's positioned himself. And so he was sort of warning Scott off of this idea.
Yep. And it's something that he's also weaponized against Nikki Haley a little bit, or his campaign has. That was one thing that they flagged in an email blast after her campaign was noting that she was praising Paul Ryan's budgeting ideas, and they were suggesting that she would be willing to make cuts too.
Right.
Towards the end of his administration, there were reports that he was telling congressional Republicans that reforms to Social Security and Medicare, which are projected to go bankrupt within the coming years, that would be like a second-term project. So he had almost suggested to them in private, according to reports, that was something that was on the table. But publicly, he's been very adamant that not one penny should be cut from either of those programs. And so that's one way that he's setting himself apart from what's shaping up to be a crowded 2024 field.
All right, and he's using that position to contrast himself with potentially Ron DeSantis, with Nikki Haley, with other people in the Republican field, and to maybe inoculate himself from those charges if President Biden and he have a rematch.
Exactly. So he's laying the groundwork. And Biden has been seizing on Social Security and Medicare. He talked about that a lot in his State of the Union address. So Trump is also trying to prepare for that as well.
Oh, he could have a presidential race with 2 men over 65 arguing about their Social Security.
Exactly.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yep.
You can read Ryan and the rest of our political team's coverage at WashingtonExaminer.com.